Chapter 2, History of Marine Science. Topic 1, Understanding the Ocean began with voyaging for trade and exploration. Here I just put in a slide to draw your attention to nautical archaeology. So if you're an archaeology major, you might want to consider going into nautical archaeology. So here in this slide, there was a Bronze Age shipwreck discovered off the coast of Turkey. So, understanding the ocean began with voyaging and trade and exploration. And we would like to take a closer look at ancient Mediterranean cultures, Polynesian explorers, and Chinese explorers. So the early history of marine science is closely associated with the history of voyaging. You had access to rich fishing grounds and you also had a strategic advantage. So ancient Mediterranean cultures started voyaging about 390 BCE. So here's an artist reconstruction of the oldest known Greek cargo ship. And actually our word ocean comes from oceanus, which is the Latin root of our word okeanos. It was used by the early Greek seafarers who ventured out of the Mediterranean into the North Atlantic. They didn't know that the North Atlantic was an ocean, but they thought of it as a big river, and they called this river Okeanos. So here's a map of the Mediterranean. Out on the left side, you can see the Strait of Gibraltar that is separating Spain from Morocco. So this is here where the Greek seafarers ventured out into the North Atlantic, thinking of the North Atlantic as being one big, swift-flowing river. The Mediterranean traders, they recorded information about locations and landmarks and currents. They were probably the first cartographers to make maps of the world. At that time, the Library of Alexandria was the beginning, we can call as the beginning of systematic study of the ocean. The Library of Alexandria is in Egypt, and it was founded in the 3rd century BC. So this library stored information on every area of human endeavor. It might be called a library, but it was probably more like our universities today. So every traveler, whether they came by caravan through the desert or arrived by ship, had to turn in their papers or their information. So at that time it was all carved in stone, it was not written on paper. So in the Library of Alexandria, everything was copied. The original was kept in the library and a copy was returned to the great traders. So over time, there was an immense wealth of knowledge that accumulated in the Library of Alexandria. And so here is the Library of Alexandria, the arrow pointing to it, so on the coast of Egypt in the Mediterranean Sea. The chief librarian of Alexandria was Eratosthenes of Cyrene. He was the first to calculate the circumference of the world, and he was also the first to introduce a system of latitude and longitude. You can read in your textbook, if you're interested, about the trigonometry he used to calculate the circumference of the world. So Pythagoras, he was actually the first one who realized that the earth was spherical. But Eratosthenes was the first one to estimate its true size. And on the illustration on the lower right-hand side, you can see his system of latitude and longitude. So latitude and longitudinal lines are not equally spaced, but he placed them through known landmarks. But he recognized early on that it's quite helpful if we had a frame of reference so we can share information. So today our longitude and latitude are imaginary lines that we draw on the map. The longitudinal lines, they go through the North and South Pole and circle the world. They're called meridians. They're 360. The prime meridian today, the line 0, is in Greenwich, England. And the latitude lines are drawn horizontally around the globe. 0 degree is the equator, and then we go 90 degree north and 90 degree south. The next explorers I would like to talk about are the Polynesians. The Polynesians early on colonized the South Pacific. This area is also referred to as the Polynesian Triangle. So first they explored and colonized central Polynesia between 500 to 1000 BCE. Then later the Easter Islands of around 300 to 600 CE. And then last the Hawaiian Islands about 800 to 1000 CE after the Common Era. The reason that it took so long to discover Hawaii was that they had to cross the equator. As we're going to be learning in the atmospheric chapter of our course, there are no horizontal winds blowing around the equator, so we refer that area as the doldrums. So it was very difficult for the Polynesians to cross the equator. So the Polynesian seafarers, they were quite advanced. So they built dual-hulled ships that were capable of carrying 100 people. They stored food, water, and seeds on their ships. They even nurtured fire on board. For navigation, they followed stars and birds. They could interpret any changes in color, sound, temperature, salinity of the waves. They observed the wind, sunset color, the hue of the moon, and marine life. And they also knew about the reversal of the trade winds. So they were not only able to go out and colonize new islands, but they were also able to return to their home islands. And just thinking about how vast the Pacific Ocean is. So you could put all the continents together, and all the continents today, they would fit into the Pacific Ocean. And there are about 30,000 islands in the Pacific. So what the Polynesians did was pretty incredible. So here's an artist imagery of a Polynesian boat discovering New Zealand. The Polynesians also settled the Easter Islands. The Easter Islands are famous for their stone statues. And there's even talk that the Polynesians could have arrived in South America. There are some similarities in words that one could argue that the Polynesians had arrived in South America. And the upper image shows an artist imagery what it could have been like as the Polynesians were discovering Hawaii. Hawaii was discovered much, much later because in order to get to Hawaii, the Polynesians had to cross the equator. And as we're going to be learning in our atmospheric chapter, there are not very many horizontal winds blowing across the equator, but we have the doldrums. And so it was very difficult without the help of the wind to cross the equator. This slide is not too serious. In Hollywood, they made a movie off the coast of Polynesia, and they left one of those fake stone statues at the bottom of the ocean, which is now a popular tourist destination. The next seafarers I would like to talk about are the Vikings. So the Vikings came from Norway, Sweden. They discovered or settled Iceland, colonized Iceland about 850 CE, Greenland by 986, and Vinland by about 1000. So I put a map with the ocean currents in the upper right corner. And the Vikings, they followed the currents indicated in white of the subpolar gyre. So they left Norway, they went to Iceland, around Greenland, and then to Newfoundland. The Chinese undertook organized voyages of discovery, and they were incredible seafarers. So they built these gigantic treasure ships, as you can see in the upper right. In comparison, the ship that Columbus used to sail to the Americas is in that scale for comparison. So these Chinese treasure fleets were much, much bigger. They had sails on multiple masts. The sails could be adjusted like Venetian blinds, were very efficient in sailing. And a treasure fleet consisted of thousands of ships. So they had a treasure fleet with treasures, so their task was to sail around and just show that China is this impressive empire, and they brought gifts and they brought gifts back. So they were accompanied by ships that stored water and had the food and had an army. They were just incredible. On the upper left side you see Zhang He, so he was a eunuch. Very often that time men were castrated, believing that if they cannot have offspring, they're less likely to overthrow the king. And so Shen Hui, he traveled extensively along the African coast, and he brought back, for example, zebras and giraffes. And then the king in the Ming dynasty would sit, or the emperor in the Qing Ming dynasty would sit in his garden with his guests, and you have these exotic animals roaming around. The Chinese also invented a compass. Yeah, and there's even speculations that the Chinese got all the way to Portugal or met some Portuguese seafarers, and that might have sparked the Renaissance in Europe. Europe was in the Dark Ages, and there's some historians who hypothesize that contacting this Chinese voyager, the Renaissance was sparked. And then the Chinese did a change in politics, and going out on the ocean in a multi-masted ship was forbidden, and so the adventures of the Chinese seafaring stopped. And I have a few quick concept check questions at the end. So who is responsible for the first accurate measurement of the circumference of the Earth? So I'm going to give you about half a minute to answer the question. If you answered A, Erastustinus of Cyrene, you answered the question correctly. The term ocean was derived from the term Okeanos, the name given by the Planck for the Atlantic Ocean. If you answered the Greeks, you answered it correctly. The Greeks began to explore outside the Mediterranean into the Atlantic Ocean around 900 to 700 BCE. Early Greek seafarers noticed a current running north to south beyond Gibraltar. Believing that only rivers had currents, they decided that this great mass of water, too wide to see across, was part of an immense flowing river. The Greek name for this river was Okeanos. Our word ocean is derived from that word, a Latin variant of that root. Phoenician sailors were also very much at home in this river, but like the Greeks, they rarely ventured out of sight of land. That concludes our first topic of Chapter 2.